G'day again, my name's Paul Morrison and great to have you with us for these conversations stronger together in conjunction with creating communities. We've been joined by a number of leaders in the community and professionals giving us some advice and talking us through how to handle this time of COVID-19. We're joined again today by Amit Khaira. He has worked for 20 years with emerging generations and young people across 3 different continents from a secondary, tertiary education, and he joins us live today. G'day, Amit. How are you?
I'm well, thanks. Morrow, how are you?
I'm very
From a distance?
well. Thanks for coming in, mate.
Thanks for having us.
Appropriately spaced. Tell us a little bit about some of the concerns you would have for the younger generation in this current climate.
Current concerns for this generation. To go deep straight away, I think a sense of meaning and purpose is a big one. I was just talking to my son last night. We were going through some photos from late last year and earlier last year, and he was seeing himself in his footy uniform. And he was just talking about how now usually he'd be getting training on Thursdays, getting ready for games on Sundays, hanging out with his mates, and it's just not an option. My 3 younger kids are home from school now, and so they're away from their teachers, from their classmates, from their other peers. And so they're really struggling with, their mates aren't coming around, they're not being able to hang out with their friends, they're not seeing their favourite teachers. And I think, so that's just internally for our family, but I think if you look at that across the board in wider society, our family would be no different to other families with young people in them as well. So what is school if it's not a building? That's a great question. So we've been unpacking that for our kids. In regards to sport, how do you stay active and healthy when you're not part of a team environment or you can't be part of some community organisation in that way? So this deeper sense of meaning and purpose, how do they get up and still have that drive every day because this is what we're going to achieve? So what is that for them? And for our younger people, I think that's just increased for them with the current situation we're going through.
Everybody's going through a change in routine and it's happened very suddenly.
Yeah.
How do you think, teenagers who are dealing with change in their life anyway, life phases as they go through puberty, how do you think they're going to cope with this extra change? One of my children is, just going to year 8, the other one's doing their year 12.
Yeah.
And they've got a number of stress, and this is just added to it and they're adjusting. How do you think young people are equipped these days to cope with that?
I don't think you can make a generalised statement. I think each individual would respond to things differently. Some thrive in change and the ever fluid nature of what's going on, and others really, really struggle. So I think for those that thrive in these situations, the question really is, how do we maintain their focus? How do we maintain their engagement? How do we make sure that this is going to still be a very productive time for them? For those that are really struggling or that generally struggle with change, is how do we ensure their sanity? How do we make sure they stay safe physically, emotionally, mentally, socially? How do we ensure their safety and that they can also still be really engaged and very intentional with what happens from here? And I think both of those are quite different, mate. We literally have gone from, in one night, extroverts used to be kings. Yeah. And now it's all about the introverts, and they're just loving this space and time and freedom and isolation. But the world has flipped. It has flipped. Yeah.
So, to say, how do we cope with it? Obviously, you've been in the education space. What are some things that you think we can put in place to equip and help our adolescents and young people through these times?
Yeah, well, you talked about structure and routine being important. I think that's critical, and that's really key during this time. But what does that structure and routine look like? It may not be getting into a school uniform physically by 7:45 every morning to head off to school, but you might still need to break down the day into bite-sized pieces so that there is enough time given to mental stimulation and physical activity and some chill-out time as well. I think those things are really important. So some sort of structure and routine that's going to work for the individual or the family collective. And also looking deeper in regards to the intentionality behind what we do. So my wife and I have been exploring this with our children, homeschooled. But I don't want my kids just sitting on a laptop all day long, getting through curriculum. We're wanting to design other ways of learning and engagement. And I think as a teacher, my statement always was, as teachers, we are supporting the children's primary educators, and that's the parents and the family unit. So with now the children being based from that family unit with the parents, that's always been the primary source of education. So how can we, as educators and wider society, support parents in how they continue to raise their children? And it's not all about curriculum and academics.
No, so much more to equip them for life. Obviously, the other thing that young people are dealing with, playing it forward, is anxiety about the future, uncertainty, and depending on, mental well-being in children and young adults has come to the fore in the last number of years, all coping with it differently. But depending on their age as to how they really grasp the context of what is taking place in their life and the significance of that as a momentous thing in their life and their development, how do you think, what are the conversations you'd have with young people if they are finding themselves thinking it too far forward?
That's a great question, man. And I think some of the things that we're experiencing as adults, it's the same, but different. So as an example, let's look at unemployment. So we know historically, in regards to the adult community, it's been sitting at about 5.5% nationwide for adults in regards to unemployment. And historically for youth in that same time frame, it's sitting at about 11 to 11.5%. Now of all the people that are unemployed in our country up till this point, because things are very rapidly changing, 36% have been the youth. So if you already look at what was adults 5%, youth 11.5%, there's some talk, and I don't want to be fear-mongering here, but there's some talk about employment in the adult community, creeping up to what the youth are experiencing, if not more. So what does that mean for the young people? So if you were to play that out, some of the assumptions that my kids have got is, when I get old enough, I'll go and get a job. It's like, well, will you? That's a real question. I've just recently I finished my time of isolation. This is my second day out. But I've recently come back from some time in Thailand working in Bangkok's largest slum. And so I was working with some of the young people in the community there. And some of the questions that we are wrestling with here, I think we still also need to remind ourselves that we are privileged to be wrestling with these questions. What does unemployment look like? That's going to be an issue now. It's been an issue for decades for so many. In regards to meaning and purpose and intentionality, like what do we do with our kids now that they're at home and they can't go to school? That's been the reality for the majority world for a very long time. So I think there's also a bit of a shift happening where we've got communities around the world that have been flourishing in spaces like what we are now walking into. What a great opportunity to learn from them now. So I'm sitting in this slum and I'm sitting amongst families and hearing about what's happening back home in Perth as it was unfolding. I'm sitting there asking some of these parents and some of these community leaders a question of, so how do you engage young people when there is high unemployment, when they can't get to school, when boredom becomes the number one thing? Like, how do you get them engaged? And again, these brothers and sisters of ours have been dealing with this stuff for a very long time. We can lean on them during these periods of time, which is a real gift to us.
Some great lessons to learn from the underprivileged. And as always, with our own children, perspective is a wonderful thing to generate that attitude of gratitude and to be grateful for what we do have as opposed to what we don't. What would your tip to the younger generation be? We've been talking that we are stronger together. If you were to encourage them along that line, what would you say to the younger generation at the moment?
What would I say to you, the younger generation? Don't be afraid to reach out. That's probably the key thing that I'd want to get across. This is not, we might be in social isolation, but you don't need to be isolated. There are people that are around that are wanting to help, that are wanting to encourage, that are wanting to still inspire and speak into you. So make use of those services and those organisations, and just be honest and open with them. Don't try and struggle through this as an individual, because the outcome of that, it doesn't usually work out well. And so we do have an amazing community that we are a part of, and there's organisations like this creating communities that have been focused for a long time in safeguarding not just adults but young people in regards to when we engage in times like this, how can we still flourish? So lean on organisations like this and others that are out there, because there is still some exciting ways forward.
Some great help out there if you just reach out.
Yeah.
Thanks so much for chatting to us today.
Thanks for having us, mate.
Been great. That's Amit Khaira. Thanks for joining us again. You can find out more of these Stronger Together conversations. Just check out your Creating Communities platform. Look forward to chatting again soon. Until then, stay safe, reach out if you need to, and don't forget to follow the government's advice on looking after yourself and your loved ones around COVID-19, remembering we are stronger together.